to be in a 2D window, right? Talking with others, but like this takes time. So we want it to be as easy as possible for people to come in and accessible as possible. So it's browser based. Everyone can come in just with a link. And there's obviously we are a startup, so we cannot address all the things that make a product equitable. So, but we also rely on things that already exist. So it's possible, for example, to put closed caption because actually this is a tool that the Chrome browser already allows. So we are like constantly trying to see how we can involve and like design for the most diversity into our product.
Yeah, and if you when you visit nowhere, you sort of see it. It sort of reminds you of like a community center. There's a lot of cultural exchange going on there with the types of events that you do, art events, just sort of things you might see at any community center.
Yeah, it's like it's very interesting you say that because like before Nowhere, we were designing a conference for a client of ours. We had another company that we did art installation and design for a movement that is called the New Public, which is like really talking about how can we look into the creation of public spaces in real life and translate to create healthier public spaces online. So we were designing for this conference, like going deep into this topic, and then the pandemic like happen and we were like, where are the public spaces that I want to inhabit while I am, like at home? Where do I want to meet my friends? What type of relationships I want to have? And that's why we also made like our tools, like our metaverse is like video first. Because we believe that like seeing facial expression also allows a lot for deeper connections and like empathy creation when you're seeing each other, you feel more present and opportunity to see like we're actually not that different. When you're not seeing each other, it creates like more of a separation. So we try to create this tool actually. Well, we have now an opportunity to create this virtual world that like really, erases boundaries in a sense. So why don't we create that with all this like opportunity for togetherness and less of separation? So that's why even like the models of like how we are setting up like payment and that conversation we had is like we saw it multiple times. We were like advised to do like a land sale, and then it just didn't make sense for us currently, like because that it just like it feels like we are we are starting separating from the moment that you're saying, say like some people can have space and some others cannot, and we just don't want to be that sort of public space in the internet.
Accessibility, absolutely. And Telly, you've done some multicultural programs yourself dealing with Web3 and the metaverse. We saw McDonald's and a Lunar New Year activation. How did that come about? And what did that show you about how the metaverse could be a place for coming together?
Yeah, we've done two metaverse activations for McDonald's in the past few months. So their first one was a partnership we did with Offline TV, which is we took a in real life pop up store and we sort of ported it over to the metaverse and we activated there, and that was a kind of a toe dip for the brand. And then during this past Lunar New Year in February, we launched something that we called the Hall of Zodiacs, which was essentially an activation in the metaverse where people could come in, learn what their Chinese zodiac sign was, and get their fortune for the new year. And the really cool thing about that was that this was a program that was primarily targeting the Asian American consumer in the U.S., but because it was virtual and it was opened up to the world, we had people dropping in from all over the place. So you would walk into the space and you would be talking to people from everywhere from Europe to South America to just like in LA, and it was a pretty amazing experience in terms of the cultural exchange that was happening. It was really going. It was a real cultural dialogue that was going on with all the guests that were attending this activation.
And in terms of just sort of, John, maybe your activities going around in the metaverse, NFT projects, how Web3 is shaping up. how do you see the topic of equity and inequality in certain areas? How does it come up in terms of your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, with as we think about equity in the metaverse, it's for me it's the same as equity in any other any other platform for marketing. So I mean, or not even marketing. I mean, I used to work at Kroger, and one of the things that we talked about was we need to have more diverse vendors. So honestly, what it is going to come down to is the brands or the agencies that are working with the brands. So the selection process, Web3 is it's a creator's economy. There's obviously people will have the money, but they can't do anything. They can't grow their ecosystem without creators, and so it's going to come down to the brands and the agencies that are working with those brands to find who the creators are, find who created these platforms and the new tech that is going to come over the next 10, 20 years, and work with those people. Work with many different cultures. Either if you're U.S. based, work with many different cultures within the U.S. or if you're global, the same. What Telly was just talking about people communicating in the same area. What's great is that you there don't have to be locations. Everyone can be in the same location and everyone can interact, but it's going to be for in this sense it's going to be on the tech companies. How are they going to create tools, translator tools, so people really can truly immerse and truly communicate with each other from across the world? So everyone's going to have everyone's going to have their role, but so it's going to come down to really looking across all culture, looking across all communities, and I'm in a lot of NFT projects. The projects within the discords that have separate channels and separate servers for different countries and different languages. Those usually are the better projects as well. So I mean, it's great that it's a creator's economy. So that's going to help. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to those brands and the people with money who are building it to be conscious about who they're selecting.
Absolutely, and Telly, you're working with brands like we mentioned McDonald's, and there are topics like brand safety that have to come up, and then there are also topics like how do you make sure you're respecting different cultures, respecting diversity,
Right.
what brands need to do to make sure they're doing that. It seems like a challenge for Web3.
It is a challenge, but obviously, I think corporate social responsibility is going to be essential in building Web3 and the metaverse because you're talking about the metaverse natives are going to be Gen Zers, and we know that corporate social responsibility is something that they value very highly with brands. So I think it's going to be inevitable. And then in terms of just increasing equity, I think we're already taking different steps from different sectors. So like today, for example, President Biden announcing that he's going to increase high-speed internet access to lower income communities. And I think moves like that are going to open up the metaverse to everyone and everywhere.
That's a good point, and that brings Anna to you too. If that actually more internet access or more access to areas like nowhere or that sort of.
Yeah. Absolutely. This is one of the like why we're designing or developing is the biggest challenge. Like to make sure that like the different types of internet and different type of machines, and we can put everyone together. So like we need to be very smart on how to develop the design of how people navigate the spaces to fit the most people and everyone have the best experience and all that with what they have in hand, right? So because we know that it's still not for everyone, like, but we are doing a lot of effort to make it the most like a light, the lightest like a platform as possible So it also runs on phones because we know like the most of the planet actually has access to better, newer phones than computers. And it's still most of the metaverse is easier to access through computers, right? So it's still like by default it's like a removing a lot of people from it. So we are trying to make an application that is like that everyone can access from anywhere in the world.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback on that. When I was at Ogilvy, we met with Decentraland and we met with Sandbox, and great things about both platforms, both games. But at the time, one of the reasons we continued to speak with Decentraland was because they did have a web browser. And Sandbox, it's going to take a while before they get to that point. So, what's important for brands as well is how many people can we reach whenever we, create an activation or a campaign, wherever that is. And so, in this case, being the metaverse.
Yeah, and just to quickly add to that, when we did our activations for McDonald's, we did offer the option of, whether it's going on a computer and accessing it that way or having the full headset experience. And we saw the majority of people that were joining our events were joining through their computers versus their headsets. So we're not quite there yet. And obviously, those cost a bit of money. And I think right now, a web-based metaverse is probably where we're going to be at for the next couple of years.
Those are all very good points because VR headsets, we're talking about exclusivity. There's costs associated with that. If you can get, and as we started the conversation, getting through at a browser level is a lot more accessible. I was going to raise the one example I saw with TBWA Paris that I think I mentioned before we came on is that so TBWA they do this project. And I thought it spoke in some ways how marketers are thinking about the topics we're talking about here. So they came up with the first homeless avatar in the metaverse. So the campaign was meant to highlight unhoused populations and let people in the metaverse not forget that there are people in the real world who still need help. And I wanted to get your thoughts on how brands can do sort of those kinds of reminders and actually help in some ways. Maybe Telly, you could start.
Yeah, I think one thing I've learned from working on some of these recent projects is doing something in the metaverse isn't much different than doing something in person in terms of how you produce it, how you organize it, and some of the things you want to keep in mind in terms of what values you're trying to express and what messages you're trying to put out there. So as I mentioned earlier, social issues and social justice is going to be top of mind as we continue to build this metaverse, and that's just going to be something that needs to be integrated into these brand activations. There needs to be a purpose for all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, to his point, I don't know how much they still do this, but growing up in grade school, some schools they go to, they go to prisons, or some school they go to a homeless part of the city. These things can now be created, through a metaverse platform, and you can experience it that way. And I think that brands or not necessarily brands, maybe more nonprofits are looking at that. But there are many different ways. And what's great is that you can show people everyone's experience, and you can get that empathy that you may not be able to get in Web2 or any other platform, because you actually can draw on that.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of projects that do try and recreate certain experiences. We've seen it for refugees, I think, where you're trying to show people who don't understand the experience maybe a deeper level through Web3 technologies. But it's also tricky, I think, because you do have to be careful that you're not being disrespectful when you do these projects too.
So that's why I said nonprofits. I think that showing the experiences and then potentially showing like what your donations or money or help can do to advance those experiences. I mean, even one of the things I'm in Cincinnati, and it's the real estate is, it's growing a lot. But also there's a lot of buildings in the lower income areas that, that there needs to be work done to them. And there's a friend of mine who, we were speaking the other day, and we were saying, what if we, just, got a picture of a map, or took a map and then, worked with developers to show exactly what these buildings could look like with funding, and then use those and make those NFTs and actually raise the funding to make it look exactly like that. So there are things that people aren't thinking about now, because a lot of people are just thinking about making money. But I think, social impact is going to be one of the biggest uses for Web3.
And that's something that we're pitching a lot as well, with some of the upcoming projects, is a social component and partnering with some nonprofit organizations. Because I think with crypto that we could, there's a lot could be done for social good.
We're gonna run out of time tonight. I could probably talk to all of you all day about these are just such interesting topics and ways that we could explore the metaverse in these important ways. I did want to ask Anna a little bit before I do let you go. What about women in the metaverse? Are there enough projects that are geared toward women, and sort of it's also can be a tough place for women in virtual reality, and getting that real interaction, it can be a harsh place sometimes. We've seen stories, so I want to get your thoughts.
I might be a little biased towards, like I have wonderful women around me. I'm part of like groups of women in the metaverse and women in Web3. So like I'm seeing a lot of very powerful women in the space. But obviously, like I think in tech in general, it's like unfortunately heavier on the men's side, and like I guess like this is like a historical way, like from culture where women like it's not empowered about like how good they can be with the math and engineering and things like that, and we end up like on this position where leaders of tech are not women. But there is fantastic women doing great projects and all the sides, like on DeFi, on like platforms, on NFT. So I guess like it is important to give light, to this project, and always like be remembering that, since we know when we are talking about equity that yes, we don't come on a level plane once you're talking about tech in general, and that also reflects on when you're talking about metaverse.
Now, before I do let all of you go, maybe briefly, are there any upcoming projects that any of you would like to call out in terms of brands, or any other sort of NFT Web3 projects?
I wish, but there's a couple that I can't speak about. And I hear that a lot in the brand world now, because they're all in the process of being created and built, and everyone wants to come out and really come out swinging. So
we'll talk about them when you're able to. Then
Same here. Yeah, we're working on a number of projects for different clients, and we're just kind of waiting for the right time to announce them.
Is there for you, Anna, anything coming up?
Yeah, next week there's a tomorrow conference, which is a conference that happens in Serbia about Web3, and they're going to be streaming all the content into Nowhere, so people are going to be able to watch the conference and participate in the metaverse.
Oh, very cool. A Web3 conference from Serbia streaming into Nowhere.
Yes, yeah. So it's one of the biggest tech conferences in Europe. And then they're focusing on Web3 and NFTs this year.
Well, thank you for all of you for joining me today, and I would love to talk more with you whenever you're all free. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And next up is Janine Poggi with a discussion about diversity in media. So hi, Janine.
Hi, Garrett. Thank you so much. That was interesting, given the whole like building of the metaverse and how we're just at like such the early stages of it, and what the opportunities are if you prioritize inclusivity and thinking about, multicultural, to make sure you're building from the ground up a more inclusive platform. I think it's an interesting opportunity there.
Yeah, I think all of the guests had interesting perspectives on what they're going to be able to do in that area. So it was a good conversation.
Thanks, Garrett.